welcome to episode 2 of Wyoming Matters. I'm your host, Kevin Christensen. Today I'm going to go solo, and I want to share some of the questions that I've received from my engagement with the public in a couple of different meetings that I've had an opportunity to be a part of. And the thing that really struck me was what great questions I received, tough and challenging questions, but also the fact that the communication, the engagement that we had was positive, it was challenging, and it was done in a respectful way. So thank you for that. And I'm looking for more of those opportunities to engage. So I want to share some of those that I've received and offer back to you what my answers were so everybody can hear. If it's important to one person that asked me, it may very well be important to many people. So I'll go ahead and get started. The first one has to do with the war in Iran. And the question is, do you support the war in Iran? So I'm going to answer that by saying, first, I support the brave men and women, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine that are currently in harm's way. Many of them are Wyomingites. I think that we as a country typically come together in times of war. We stand with the president to show a sign of solidarity for our country, and I do that. I'm supporting President Trump in our actions that were taken in Iran. I feel that Ayatollah Khomeini was an evil dictator of that country and oppressed a number of people. He's dead now, and the world is a better place for that. I also think that we as a nation, and same with our allies, will never stand for a nuclear-armed Iran. I don't think that will ever happen. So now when we think about it, this important action that was taken militarily against Iran comes with it some hard questions, though, that need to be asked by Congress. My experience in the Pentagon as a senior military advisor, I know that quite a few of the things that are known to the nation are never going to be released to our nation as a whole. So Congress has a role that they have to play. First, I believe that the president did, in fact, have legal authority to take military action in Iran. That's clear in the Constitution that he is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. And also, I believe that the War Powers Act, in this case, gives him the authority to do that. So why now? The question, though, is why did we take this action at this particular time? Well, I tend to think that we saw an opportunity. I think we saw that there were a number of indications of social and economic turmoil in the country, and we saw that it was maybe an opportune time to seek a regime change. And regime change is exactly what we did. I also think that our ally, Israel, was thinking about doing this in an autonomous way. And I think it's reasonable to assume that we chose to stand with our ally, Israel, in this particular case. If we let Israel attack unilaterally, we would probably see that all of Iran's arsenal, and a very large arsenal that they have of missiles, would have all landed on Tel Aviv. In this case, those missiles were spread out across the whole area, and no one particular target really got hit as bad as it could have. We suffered American casualties. As an American veteran, a combat veteran, I think a special thought and care should go into any type of military action. We should know exactly what it is that we're trying to achieve and how we're going to achieve that. Now, let's talk about the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act requires 3 things from the president. He must attempt consultation in almost every case. There are certain circumstances where an immediate action might be required. There's not time. But there is consultation that is required. The second thing is reporting in 48 hours. The president administration is required to report to Congress and explain what actions were taken and what is planned for the future. Probably one of the most important things that does not get a lot of understanding out there is the 60-day requirement. If you think back when the War Powers Act was first put into place, we were involved in Vietnam. and it seemed like a conflict that was never going to end. The War Powers Act was vetoed by the president at the time, and it was a case where there was strong bipartisan support, and it was passed in a veto override. Now, this 60-day limit gives the president time to take a necessary action in order to secure the country and to take care of an immediate threat. But actions past 60 days must have the authorization of Congress. Why is the authorization of Congress important? Well, first, Congress is our elected representative. They represent the view of the people, and it's our people, our sons and daughters, that are going to be put in harm's way. Congress has the authority to declare war. Congress has the authority to fund it. So if the Department of War comes back with a big bill for this, they should be in consultation so Congress knows how much money it's going to take to fight this. Every war has a cost. It's in people, the most important, but it's also in the cost of our national revenues that it takes to fund a conflict like this. The more technical a war is, the more expensive it gets. The longer it goes, the more expensive that it gets. So that's the War Powers Act, and I think that we should then expect that Congress will ask the tough questions. Congress cannot abdicate their role in representing the American people and asking those tough questions. We've heard things like the goal is unconditional surrender. As a soldier who fought in Iraq and looking at military history, I don't think that unconditional surrender is a reasonable outcome to expect in this particular case. Outside of the use of nuclear weapons against Japan that brought World War II to a conclusion, I'm not aware of a case where air power alone has brought a nation to terms for an unconditional surrender. So we have to look at what else are we trying to achieve. Clearly, regime change was one of the things that was a desired outcome in this conflict. And I think that that was achieved. And there will be plenty others that will rise up and assume that role. I think probably the military is largely in charge in Iran at this point. The other thing that we want to see is what exactly is the desired end state? Are we trying to degrade the Iranian military capability to a certain point? And what is that point that we're trying to degrade it to? Can't expect that we're going to do nation building. If you're going to do nation building and expect that you're going to have a country that is going to be friendly to the United States and going to want to take on a representative form of government of some sort, you have to do nation building. Now, there are some great examples in history. We've taken nation building. Korea, to me, would be probably the best example. Since the Korean War, we stood by and ensured the sovereignty of that country. And we saw that they went through a lot of turmoil, but eventually that country became one of our strongest allies and is one of the top 10 industrialized countries in the world. What's the key thing? You had to be there. You have to be willing to stay there. And we're still there today. I don't think American people are really interested in the idea of ground troops being introduced. And I think the president has made it clear that he does not intend to employ ground troops. This is another example where the War Powers Act would require the president to explain to the American people what the desired goal is and what are we trying to achieve. So in summary, I support the actions that the president took to secure our freedom and to secure the safety and security of our closest allies in the region. It had to be done. But that 60 days is coming up, and it's now time for the administration to come forward to Congress and clearly explain what the exit strategy is, what we're going to achieve, and what means that we're going to use to achieve it. The other question I got had to do with the Save America Act. And for those of you who are following this as it plays out in Congress, the Save America Act has a lot to do with requiring ID for voting. And I strongly support requiring ID for voting in an election. I think it's common sense that you would have to prove who you are. Think of all the things that we do in our daily lives where we have to prove who we are. Proving that you're an American citizen and you meet the requirements in the Constitution to be a voter only makes sense. Now, that being said, I have some concerns. I think there are some aspects of the Save America Act that do justify some further debate. I think it's important that we make sure that women are not restricted in their right to vote. If they change their name as a result of marriage, I expect that there's going to be some challenges in bringing a birth certificate that's got a different name to a voter registration location. So I think the requirement of either a birth certificate or a passport does seem a little bit challenging to me. I also think that there should be some provision for simply having the ID that state requires. Let's remember that the states ultimately have the authority for how they run their elections within their state. I think in Wyoming, we do a pretty good job of that. For as far as I can remember, we've had a requirement that we've had to produce an ID to prove who we are. I think that that's a reasonable thing. What we shouldn't have is an undue burden beyond what the state requires in order to prove that you are, in fact, a citizen of the United States and a resident. I don't know how many people have a passport. I have a passport, but I don't think that everybody in the United States that's of voting age probably has a passport. So that's another challenge, I think, that has to be addressed in how do we ensure that we're meeting the requirements of the Constitution, United States citizens are voting, but we're also not creating a barrier at the voting place. The other thing that comes up is the discussion about so-called mail-in ballots. The term I think we use in Wyoming is an absentee ballot. And I think an absentee ballot has a place in our voting system, and I'll explain why. For many years, I voted as an absentee voter. 27 and a half years in the United States Army, serving in places all over the world, even including in places inside of the United States. The ability to come back in time of an election to vote in the state of Wyoming just wasn't reasonable to expect. In some cases, I'm thousands of miles away or maybe even in a combat zone. It's important that we also preserve the right to vote for and ensure that people who are disabled, people have difficulty being able to make it to the voting place, have the ability to vote, and that we should be careful that we are not restricting the ability of people who have difficulty, elderly, severely disabled people. So let's make sure that when we do something that is attempting to ensure that the voting is being done in accordance with the Constitution, that we're also not adversely impacting the ability of people. And I'm using the example of military and disabled people. Make sure that those folks are not being restricted in their ability to vote. Absentee ballots have a place. We can do it the right way. I voted absentee for many, many years, and I believe that there was a requirement where you had to have it notarized. That seems like a reasonable thing that you could do. You got to present your ID to a person who's a certified notary public, and they can verify that that's you and that you are, in fact, the one that is casting that ballot. Let's also make sure, too, that we're not restricting access to voter registration for our residents. When you look inside of Wyoming and the voting age population, I think we're around 410 or so thousand that are voting age population within the state of Wyoming. But if you take a look at how many people are actually registered to vote in our state, I think you're looking at a number of around 210,000. So maybe about half or so of the population that could vote in Wyoming is actually registered to vote. It's an important time in our country. I think our country needs increased participation in our process. For our democratic process to work, you have to participate. I know a lot of people say, I like to stay out of politics. I don't want to get involved with politics. Well, if you hear the rhetoric that's going on, who can blame you, right? But let's put it to you this way. If you're staying out of politics, just look at the math. a small number of people who get involved, want to make a difference, go get registered to vote and participate in the process. Find candidates that make sense, that can answer the tough questions that you have for them. In the last episode of Wyoming Matters, we talked about the why matters. Don't be afraid to ask a candidate what they stand for. But follow up with the even tougher question. Why do you feel that way? Are you telling me what I want to hear so that I will vote for you? Or is that how you actually believe? And when it comes to representing the over 500,000 people in the state of Wyoming, are you going to take your belief system and impose your will on the rest of us in Congress? Or are you going to represent us? I think you should ask those kinds of questions. Get involved, get registered, and given that there are going to be challenges necessarily in finding the right documents, go ahead and get that stuff together now and make a trip down to your county building, and you will find people there that can handle your voter registration in a very short period of time. I think you can probably do the whole thing easily in about 15 minutes. Now, of course, I'm a Republican, so I want to advocate that you join the Republican Party. But more important is that you join and you participate in the process and you do what I think our citizen responsibility is, and that's participate in the process. Get your voice heard and make sure that you do it not just in the presidential elections, but also in all the off-cycle elections too. So that's my view on the Save America Act. The other question I had is, what's your view of the current government shutdown? So as you know, the government shutdown that is currently taking place is what we call a partial shutdown, right? So not all of the government is shut down, but the Department, the DHS of Homeland Security has a funding lapse right now. And the challenge that many people are experiencing is if you're going through an airport, you'd find that TSA is not at full capacity at these airports. And many people are experiencing extended wait times and challenges of being able to get through. Now, we know that TSA is important for our security. Certainly 9/11 taught us that we have to be very, very vigilant in the security of people getting on our airlines. The TSA agents are hardworking men and women that deserve to be paid for the work that they are doing right now. And they're being asked to work without any pay. I don't think that's right. What should happen? Well, I think Congress needs to find a solution. Now, let's talk about what the main issues are and why do we have an impasse on this. So you may see in the news, the Republicans have attempted a couple of different funding strategies for DHS, and the Democrats have held up that process, and it's not making it past the Senate. Primarily in the Senate, and in the Senate, as you know, a senator can filibuster for an extended period of time and essentially prevent a bill from getting to vote and turning into law. So how do we get past this nonsense, right? Well, the first thing that we have to realize is that if we want something to get done, we have to be able to form alliances. We got to be able to form relationships. And we got to focus on what does it take to get the work done and take care of the American people. We also need to focus on the people that are being asked to do the work. They should get paid for the work that they're doing. That only makes common sense. So what are the real issues that are being discussed right now? One of them is a requirement. The Democrats want to see that the ICE agents that are out doing their work, and I think for Border Patrol as well, they want to see body cameras. They want to see some enhanced accountability. Now, when I was in federal service, I had responsibility for federal law enforcement, and we introduced body cameras to the federal law enforcement officers that were under my supervision. Now, of course, there was some reluctance initially, but in every case we found when we needed to go back and take a look at body camera footage, it showed that the officers were behaving in a professional way, and it always worked in their benefit. It helped to find resolution to issues that are being brought up by members of the public, I think it's a reasonable thing. Other federal law enforcement agencies have that, and I think that seems like a thing that we could find a way to compromise on that. One of the other issues is concern that ICE agents are wearing masks, and that the mask is kind of creating this fear factor amongst the population, and not just necessarily the people that are potentially illegal aliens in the country, but also the people who are present when these raids take place who are American citizens. Now, none of the federal officers that worked for me wore masks in the performance of their job. I don't know that that isn't something that isn't a reason for a compromise. There's got to be a solution. Maybe there are certain cases where a mask is necessary, but it seems like that's something that we could find a compromise on. Another discussion has to do with making sure that when a raid takes place, that if there is a search inside of a private residence or a business, that there's a search warrant that is in place. Now, a search warrant is part of our rights that against unreasonable search and seizure. That seems like a reasonable thing. In certain circumstances, it makes sense to me that a search warrant is in place before someone busts into your house or to your place of business. That would be how it would work with other law enforcement activities, not just at the federal level, but it'd be at the state and local level too. Those are our rights as American citizens, but also you have to think that not in every situation where there's a raid being conducted is it exclusively illegal aliens that are expected to be inside that location. So again, it's situation dependent. I'm not saying that you need a search warrant in every case, but if you're going to go into the home of an American citizen and you're going to go looking around, you should have a search warrant. You would want that if federal agents were coming to your house. I think it's reasonable for that to be a requirement for any type of a search and seizure that involves an American citizen. Now, the other one has to do with creating this idea of a safe space for enforcement. Schools and hospitals and churches would be exempt from ICE activity. I totally disagree with the Democrats' idea on that one. If you're breaking the law, you're breaking the law whether you did it in the church or you did it in a hospital or anywhere. So I don't like this idea that there's this safe place where laws are not enforced. If you break the laws of the United States of America, there are consequences for doing that. And I support that those laws should be enforced. Creating this idea of a safe space, or the idea that there are entire communities that say, well, we're not going to cooperate with federal law enforcement agencies. Those same agencies will expect federal law enforcement cooperation, like with the FBI, to help them solve a murder case. But you can't just flip the switch and say, well, we're not going to support you when it comes to ICE or Border Patrol activity in our areas. It's all or nothing, all right? You're either breaking the law or you're not breaking the law, and there is no safe space. So my point is, you have to build relationships. You got to get down to what the issues are. Right now, both sides are blaming each other for the impasse. American people expect more than that. You can blame each other for a little while, but after a while, it's go work it out. Go figure out a solution and find out where you have areas where you can compromise. Looking at some of the issues that the Democrats raised, I think there is room for Republicans to be able to find some compromise, but not in all areas, right? I think there are reasonable things that we should stick to our guns on and absolutely not compromise. But you got to have the conversations. You got to build the relationships. If all you do is stand back and call each other names and it's un-American and all of this rhetoric that goes on, the work of the American people and the livelihood of the people who are doing the work to keep our nation safe sounds like a secondary priority. Let's move that up and make that a top priority. Let's get DHS funded. That's an important thing. that I think Congress should force themselves to get done. There's a recess potentially coming up. I call on members of Congress, do not go on recess when there is outstanding work that needs to be done. Stay there, get it done, and when you've got it complete and it's on the president's desk, then you can go on recess. Let's put the work of the American people as our number one priority. Another interesting question that I had, and this is a little bit philosophical, and it took me a moment to reflect. I was asked, Kevin, you're running for the U.S. House of Representatives. You're a Republican in Wyoming. What kind of Republican are you? So let me give you my thoughts on what kind of Republican I am. The kind of Republican that I am is a person who cares about what the views, beliefs, and values are of the people that I seek to represent for the state of Wyoming. That's not just the people who look like me, who think like me, and are a member of the same party that I'm a member of. All of Wyoming. I want to be a Republican for all Wyoming. That means you have to listen. You can't just go around and tell people, this is what you should believe, this is what you should think. I think Wyoming people are pretty savvy. They know what they believe in. And I think what they want is responsiveness from the people that they put in office to listen to what they have to say, what their concerns are, and to go to DC and put some sense into that organization and get work done. Then I kind of reflected a little further. I said, well, if I'm going to say what kind of Republican I am, I feel like I need an example to help illustrate what that means to me. So the very first election that I voted in was 1984. And President Ronald Reagan, to me, was an example of the kind of Republican that I want to be. What kind of Republican was Ronald Reagan? Ronald Reagan built coalitions. He was a great communicator. He knew what mattered to the American people. America first. One thing you could never doubt about Ronald Reagan was whose side he was on. He was on the side of the American people. Remember, too, Ronald Reagan was a Democrat. He converted to being a Republican. What's the value of being able to see both sides of a situation? Is that you can find ways for compromise. You can find ways to work together. And one of the things that's happened in our system lately is that we've seen this increased partisanship. The left goes to the left, the right goes to the right, and now there's this void in the middle where there's not a lot of people who are moderates. Kind of Republican I am, I'm a moderate. I feel like the place that you want to be is in a reasonable place that represents most people and what their views are. Now, in the partisanship that we are seeing now, particularly in Congress, we've created this situation where there is very, very few situations of bipartisanship in legislation. Now, why is that? And why do we see that as a trend? Well, one of the things that happened a few years ago was that we got rid of the earmark. Now, the earmarks were bad, right? Little pork belly project. I'll agree to help you on this. I'll vote for you here, but I expect this entry will be here that brings, this special road project or this special thing back to my home state. Now, as bad as those earmarks were, and it probably is good that we got rid of them, they were the connecting tissue that got the left and the right, Democrats and Republicans, to come together and go, what's it going to take to get this done? It was the glue that made the compromise work. We got rid of that, and it fractured, and now we're in the corners. And the only possible solutions that we can have now is I win, you lose. Now, if things change and Congress switches from Republican control to Democrat control, that's going to completely switch around too. The only way that it'll work is Republicans lose and Democrats win. We're not leaving any ground for any type of compromise. That's not what we need for getting the work of the American people done. We're going to have to come together. Let's put America first, and let's do the Ronald Reagan example of putting America first. Find compromise. If all we do is just say, well, Democrats are all evil and they're just bad people. Democrats are Americans too. We can have different views from them. We can disagree vehemently with them on a number of issues. In the end, it's going to take both of us to get this country working and doing things that make sense for the American people. Leadership is about getting people with different ideas together, working together, and getting the work done. You can't do that if you stand on the corners and you take ideological positions. So the other thing I would describe what kind of Republican I am is I'm an issues-focused Republican and not ideologically driven. I want to get the work of the American people done. I want to take care of the things that matter most to the people of Wyoming. I don't think Wyoming people are necessarily driven by pure ideology. They want to see Congress get the work of the American people done. They're tired of seeing government shutdowns. As I mentioned in the last podcast, the last time Congress got a budget done on time was 1997. Now, how many of us would keep our jobs if the last time we got it done on time was 1997? I'm thinking most of us would have some tough conversations with our boss. In this case, the boss is the people. We, members of Congress, work for the people of Wyoming, and we should never let them forget that. They work for the people of Wyoming. Congress is not your leader. They're your representative in Congress. Lead in Congress, represent the people of Wyoming. That's my view. That's the kind of Republican I am. The other question that I got that I thought was a very thought-provoking question, I'm asking people, what are your concerns? What's on your mind? What are the things that matter most to you? And one of the best questions I got, and I want to thank the gentleman who gave this to me, he turned it around on me and he said, Kevin, what are the things that worry you? You've been in Wyoming. You're a third generation Wyoming man. Your son's a third generation University of Wyoming graduate. You've got a perspective. What are the things that worry you? Well, I'm going to tell you, one of the things that worries me is about the economy of the state of Wyoming. I feel like there needs to be a lot more conversation about what's happening with our economy. One of the things that we really enjoy in Wyoming is that we do not have a state income tax. I think that's wonderful. I'm glad that we don't have a state income tax. Why do we not have a state income tax and other states do? Well, we're blessed with the amount of resources that are here in the state of Wyoming. Coal is a great example. Coal mining is so essential to the economy of the state of Wyoming. Now, coal, though, has been in decline for a while. Probably about 10 years ago, we would have had about 302,000 megawatts of energy across the country that was produced with coal. Now I think we're sitting around a little under 180,000 megawatts of power that's being produced by coal. That's a decline in energy production that is associated with the primary revenue source that we have for our state. So what are we going to do about it? Well, having been a person who is on the federal government side and looking at the permitting, I can tell you that one of the things that's happening is the coal companies are not seeking access right now to more federal coal. They're seeing this decline, and it's not driven necessarily by regulation and bureaucracy. The demand is dropping. What do we need to do? We have got to get more access to global markets for Wyoming coal. Wyoming coal is the best coal that you can have. It's the cleanest burning, low sulfur coal, and we've got to get it access to the markets. China and other countries would love to buy our coal. We have states like Washington and California that have blocked our ability to get our product to market. Now, the state of Wyoming has fought back on that. Where was the congressional delegation in helping the state of Wyoming on that? One state cannot be blocking the economic viability of another state. And it was pretty clear that these were some folks that for environmental concerns or other reasons tried to block and did successfully block Wyoming coal from being able to get access to market. We're going to put an end to that. I think that one state cannot block another state economically. We've got power that's being produced in Wyoming. Our solar and our wind is powering parts of California, Arizona, and Nevada. I don't think they'd like it if we went and flicked the switch off on the power that we're generating that's going to help them out. And they best not be turning off the switch that is vital to Wyoming's economy. Wyoming coal, access to global markets, and finding other ways to make coal burn cleaner, carbon capture, all the technologies that are currently being looked. If we can make those come to fruition, we can get coal back into being a bigger part of energy production across the country. Now, what we can't do is do what the Biden administration tried to do, and that's just cut it off. Cut it off. There are states, many states, that rely exclusively on Wyoming coal for their energy production. You can't just flick the switch overnight, tell everybody to drive EVs. Heck, you don't even have the electric production to put all these EVs on the power grid. It takes decades to get new power generation and new capability online. Let's be smart about how we do that. Let's make sure that Wyoming coal is available for mining as long as there is a demand and a need for it. If other forms of energy come out, and that's how energy is produced 50 years from now, so be it. But while there's a demand for Wyoming coal, let nothing stand in the way of our industry and our jobs and our livelihoods. We're going to get coal to new markets, and we're going to find better ways to enhance the domestic market for coal. Now, the same is true on the oil and gas side, also very important for our economy in the state of Wyoming. Natural gas has not been very expensive lately. We have oil and gas projects that have been permitted and haven't even been drilled. Manita Divide would be an example of a natural gas project that we just haven't seen any development take place. So what do we have to do? Let's go after some global markets again. We see Russia exerting themselves in the Ukraine crisis, and the threat is always to cut off Russian natural gas from Western European consumers that rely on those pipelines that bring natural gas from Russia and power these countries. There's brinksmanship going on. You support Ukraine? Well, we'll just go and turn off your natural gas. Let's let the Russians turn off the natural gas, and let's get Wyoming natural gas in development, and let's get Western Europe and Central Europe on the natural gas that we can make, and we can develop that here. That's global power when we can turn off Russia's economy, and it's a great way for us to improve and build alliances with our allies in Europe. So I think that's something we have to really look at. Those two industries, the coal and the oil and gas industries, are so essential to the state of Wyoming. We have to make sure that there are many new opportunities for us to sell our natural gas and our coal worldwide. And let's take advantage of the fact that we can produce that here in the state of Wyoming, and we can put a lot of people to work. Another thing that really concerns me is the youth drain that we have right now in the state of Wyoming. I saw some data recently that really I found very troubling, and this really concerns me. 30% of the people born in the state of Wyoming will be gone by the time they reach the age of 18. 50% will be gone by the time they're in their 20s. 65% of Wyoming-born kids growing into their 30s will leave by the time they're in their 30s. Now, that's a concern. We have a drain of talent I don't want to see kids leaving the state of Wyoming and find opportunities for them to find what they want to grow and prosper. Wyoming is a wonderful, wonderful place to live. I love calling Wyoming home. But if we have a situation where we're continually losing our youth to other states, let's get competitive about this, okay? If people are going to Colorado and other states, let's find out why they're leaving. One of the reasons that in that same survey that was keeping track of how many people are leaving, number one answer was they just didn't feel like they had good job opportunities that match their skill sets in the state of Wyoming. We can do something about that. There are some states that are actively trying to get our youth to come and move to their state, and they've got jobs, they've got job programs, and they even have ways of subsidizing one of the biggest costs that young people face, which is getting affordable health care. Now, there are some pretty good ideas that I've heard out there for how we can make our state more competitive. But one thing we have to do is we got to invest in that. We got to make sure our university, our one university in the state, is fully funded and is bringing those talents and skills to bear. And let's make sure that that is a number one world-class organization to train Wyoming kids. And then let's make sure that we as a state are being competitive. If somebody's out competing us, Wyoming people know how to compete. We can compete with any state. But if we just sit back and let them leave, eventually that's going to come back and hurt us. So we need to find a way to compete with other states. Let's keep Wyoming kids growing up in Wyoming, and they'll enjoy the same benefits that we have enjoyed as being longtime Wyoming residents. So those are the two things that I relate as things that really worry me: the economy and the drain of youth leaving the state of Wyoming. But there are solutions that are out there. Again, how do we do these things? I feel like we're stronger together. We've got some pretty smart people at the university, at the state, as well as other agencies that are out there to assist us. Let's get after these things. Let's rebuild our economy in Wyoming. Let's ensure that the access to federal resources that are in our state are readily available. And I've got a lot of ideas on how we make sure that those energies and those areas for economic development are unleashed. So I'll just kind of conclude this podcast by saying thank you for the people that have taken the time to engage with me. I encourage that. I look forward to those engagements. You've given me some great questions, and it's given me an opportunity to provide those responses back to you. Whether you choose to vote for me or not for the U.S. House of Representatives, I want to help make you informed about where I stand and to be able to go ask some tough questions of the other candidates too. In the end, make a decision to participate in the process and choose the people that you want to represent you in Congress. Don't sit this one out. Go get registered to vote and participate in our system. Again, we're stronger together. A small number of us that participate can make a huge difference, really a fundamental landscape difference in the direction of things that go on in our state and nationally. Again, I'm Kevin Christensen. I'm your host for Wyoming Matters. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Wyoming Matters podcast. Be sure to click subscribe down below and leave comments back on what topics you'd like for me to handle in the future. We've got a couple of them that were in the works. We're going to talk about healthcare and how can we crack the code on affordable access to healthcare. We're going to talk about oil and gas development in Wyoming and how do we create more opportunities for economic investment there. And we've got other ideas that are in the works. And I want to hear from you because I want to talk about the issues that matter to Wyoming. This is the Wyoming Matters podcast. Thank you very much, and God bless.